Hey there, it's Thomas from Sleepless Studios here. Thanks for listening to Sleepless, a podcast about the creative process. As you can see, we've officially opened the new Podcast Pro space here at Sleepless Studios. Robin and I originally started shooting season 2 while we were still building the space. Well, as you can see now, it's looking great. When we recorded this episode, the decor and design of the set was still evolving and the video equipment wasn't quite there yet, but the interviews were so good we wanted to share them with you. So as you watch the next couple of episodes, you'll see some incredible interviews and you'll be able to watch the studio evolve into what you see here. Thank you so much for watching, and please enjoy this episode with Stephen Stohn.
And it should never be recorded. And then he paused, and I sort of went like that, and he said, "So when are we going in the studio?"
And we are back on the Sleepless Pod.
We are back, baby.
We are back, and this time we are lucky to be joined by Stephen.
Stephen Stohn.
Yes.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very
And a real pleasure to have had a tour of the rest of the studio here.
Oh, yeah,
I think this whole concept of bringing together a community that's 24/7 is pretty amazing. So well done, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, well, like we said, it's still early days here, but we're happy with the progress so far and lots of plans for 2025. So onwards and upwards. So I guess to start, Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners there?
Sure. Stephen Stohn, weird spelling of Stone, Stohn. If you ever run into anyone with that spelling in North America, they're related to me somehow. Yeah.
Do you know its origins or anything? Or?
It's like it started in Finland as Steen, and then it sort of worked its way through.
Okay.
Yeah.
North Americanized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if it was really North Americanized, it would be the proper Stone.
That's
but,
true.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
And then, so a little bit about yourself. I know you've been in the music entertainment industry for a while.
I could talk for the entire length of this podcast times 10 about getting in. Like the very first, and I actually would ask the two of you the same question.
Right.
The very first concert I ever saw I was 16 years old. It was the mid-1960s, and it was a little group called the Beatles.
Wow.
And when I saw that concert, it was like, I am going to be a rock star. And by the way, back then, people would sort of carry their equipment up on stage. It wasn't the huge back line that you have now.
Right.
And I don't think they performed for more than, it was a bit more than half an hour, but certainly not as long as 45 minutes.
Right.
And it didn't matter because for the entire time you couldn't hear a thing. It was just screaming, 16,000 kids screaming at the top of their lungs.
Was that here?
It was here. It was at Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto.
Oh, wow. And it was their first time. Was that their first time?
It was the first time here in Toronto. And of course, they didn't do all that much touring. It was a couple of years of touring, and then they started to be more studio, and then they didn't exist. But so that started it all off.
Yeah.
And so I always wanted to be in the entertainment world. And if I couldn't be a rock star per se, then I wanted to be in the industry. So I became an entertainment lawyer.
Right. That's interesting.
Worked on, in our early 20s, a group of us, 3 of us actually, produced some small films, which were entirely unsuccessful. So I've learned to embrace failure, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think that's part of it, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, you've got to.
Yeah.
And then that carried on. In 1979, a young woman came into my office with a little book called Ida Makes a Movie, and which she had come into her possessions sort of by accident. She'd wanted to make films, and the librarian at her school, who was her best friend, ordered all these books on how to make a film, because there was no internet in those days.
Right.
And Ida Makes a Movie wasn't that at all. It was about a cat who makes a film. But she thought, well, this is charming. I think I could turn this into a little short film. I'd make the cat a girl. but how do I get the rights? So she was directed to this young entertainment lawyer just recently promoted from the bar. And I helped her. I actually gave her some free legal advice and said, the book is out of print. You don't need my advice. Here's a form to buy the audiovisual rights.
Okay.
Go and negotiate it yourself, because, if lawyers get involved, it will just get really complicated. There'll be legal fees. It'll just go up and up and up.
Yeah.
Do it yourself. And I didn't see her again for a few years. But that little film, she produced it, and it had a little bit of success across Canada. And the CBC wanted to run it, which is our, national broadcasting corporation. So she did another one. And she produced it for like $5,000 or something. She did another one called Noel Buys a Suit, and then another called Casey Joins a Gang. And the CBC said, how are we going to market this? Because there's, what do we call? It's like a series, and we'd like some more of them. But one's about Noel, one's about Casey, one's about Ida. She said, I don't know what to call the series, but we shoot it on, my friend Bruce, the librarian who gave me the Ida Makes a Movie. He had a house on Degrassi Street, and it's about kids. Why don't we call it The Kids of Degrassi Street?
Oh, so that's why that show. Yeah.
And then as it aged up to become Degrassi Junior High, she said, I've been doing all the sort of business and legal work myself. I need the help of who was that nice young gentleman who gave me some free legal advice? And I like to say she's paid very dearly for it ever since. It was almost 15 years later that we got married.
Wow.
So at first I was just the
That's
lawyer.
a great meet cute in itself. There's a movie in that.
There's a movie.
That's right.
But yeah, so we were talking a bit off the podcast, and one of the things you mentioned, which I thought was really admirable, was the biggest kick that you got out of Degrassi was seeing all the people that came through to actually go on further in their career. Like, you could have easily said, "Oh, I'm glad it did really well, and that was great for me." But what you said was, and obviously none more than other than Drake out there, but. I think that in itself probably is partially why it was so successful, because it wasn't about the trying to clout it. It was about, a passion.
I have a favorite saying, which if I had a tombstone at someday, I wouldn't mind it being on the tombstone, although I'll probably be cremated, so I don't know if you still have tombstones or whatever. But it comes from Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot, which is, if you haven't read the play or seen it, do.
Okay.
But the phrase is, the right deed for the wrong reason is the greatest treason. And so doing things, what you're talking about is doing something for the right reason. I mean, so you do a show like Degrassi because you want to, you want to entertain, you want to engage, but you want to educate, you want to empower.
Right.
And that is really, I would say, the number one thrill from doing the show was in the early days, it was actually snail mail, and there was tons of it. It would come in baskets from audiences, and particularly the mail, and of course later it was email, and then it was on the web, from somebody who'd been touched by it and whose life had changed because of it. And that was the real driving force. And then what we were talking about was being just so pleased when somebody, over 40 years, there's thousands of people who've worked in one capacity or another on the show, who've gone on to success. And we think, yeah, you got your start with us. That's pretty pleasing to see somebody doing so well.
No, it really is. The thing about actually, I was even thinking maybe we'll get that quote up in the wall up here, but it definitely is. And even when I think about series as a whole, I feel like everyone, as they grow up, especially now, like, has that ephemeral series that they used to watch or rewatch. For me, I loved Scrubs, the TV show.
Yes.
I've rewatched it since. I've rewatched it a few times, but it is such it goes under the radar so much. But how much long-standing series impacts people's life actually, because they grow up with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the things they like, the heartwarming moments, the lows, the highs, and all those can really like set somebody up.
People sometimes ask me, they want to help to get in the business, or they are in the business, and they say, well, how do you pitch projects and things? And to me, there's two ways to pitch projects. And I think this applies not just in the television business, but in music and in life. One is, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with this, it wasn't the way we did it. You go around and you find out what the market is. So in the television concept, or the television world, you would go to the various broadcasters and say, what are you looking for? And they might say, oh, we've got an opening coming up at 7 o'clock on Sundays. And you think, oh, okay, 7 o'clock Sundays. It's either a news show or a Disney kind of show. And so you then create something and go back to them. That to me is doing it for the wrong reason. That's going out and saying, well, I just want to
Fill the slot.
Fill them all.
Right.
The other way is to come up with something and say, no, I've got this idea for a show that I really think is going to work. And you work on it and you develop it, and then you go around to the broadcasters, and they may say no, but in working on it, you're sort of successful anyway, because you're working on something you're passionate about. You really believe in what you're doing. And we found that to be extraordinarily successful. Yes, there were shows we developed that didn't get on the air, but we had about a 50% success rate.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
That was because we'd go around and people would say, oh, no, we're not interested. But somebody would be interested in the passion that was behind it, because it was real. It was the right deed for the right reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I know George Lucas, when he was pitching Star Wars, people were like, what are you talking about? This is ludicrous. This will never work. And I think he ended up getting funding from somebody in Pixar back before it was Pixar, maybe. And yeah, he ran with it, and that's
And another interesting thing, sort of along the same line, but it's George Lucas. I was actually in a master class with George Lucas, many, many years ago.
Wow.
And what he said about Star Wars, when you think about it, there's an awful lot of truth in it. He said, I wanted to shoot something that if there was no sound, you would know what was going on. Almost like a comic book where you can tell a lot from the action. But if you think about it, you could sort of get the story of Star Wars just from the pictures.
Yeah, I'd never even
that's
thought
true.
about that before.
That's
and that's so
And
accurate.
what a powerful method of storytelling.
Oh, it is.
Then the words and the music and all those other things become just a huge plus.
It goes back to, even if you go back to like ancient Greece, right? Like, you would sit up in the pulpits and you wouldn't actually be able to like hear everything, but they would overact everything, so you would be able to understand. So I suppose there's something, onto something there, that it goes way back to, when we enjoyed entertainment like that.
Yeah. It reminds me, actually, when I was back in Ireland there, I saw Cillian Murphy's new movie. What's it? All the small things, or something along those lines. But in that, he doesn't say a lot in that movie either. But the way he like expresses, you can almost feel what he's trying to say through
Small
his
things like
performance.
these.
Small things like these. That's it. Yeah. So it just shows like, you don't need words to have a powerful piece of art or expression. Or
there's different ways to do things.
Yeah.
And even on the flip, there was a film that came out, I think it was called My Dinner with, I'll say Antoine, I've got the wrong title. And the entire film is nothing but two people talking.
Right.
And so there's no action. It's sort of the absolute reverse.
Yeah.
But it is so engaging.
Right.
So there's different ways to get your art out. And you just do it your way.
Yeah. Well, on that, what's the most like expressive or project that's come across your desk?
Oh, well, there's so many, because as a lawyer, I worked with a whole ton of musicians.
Right.
And back in the day, an entertainment lawyer like myself was very important in getting them record deals.
Sure.
And so there were a number of of artists that you would know. Now, this is going back in the day. The one that really fascinated me the most, and her career is carried on to this day, and she was very successful, back in the time, was K.D. Lang, who I saw performing when she was very young, just here in Toronto at the Brunswick Tavern, what was then called the Brunswick Tavern, at the corner of Bloor and Brunswick. Tiny little space, tiny stage, and absolutely unclassifiable music. I mean, she would sing everything. It was Patsy Cline, but there were top 40 songs that she would throw herself around the stage. And she was, in many ways, the epitome of doing things exactly by what is driven to her from the core of her being, from the core of the universe, from the collective unconscious, whatever you wanted, what Rick Rubin talks about.
Right.
That creativity just coming out in what was a very, very shy person in, she's probably wouldn't be seen as shy anymore, but back in the day, very shy. But when she got out on stage, she suddenly became a completely different person and was, in her words, she was the reincarnated spirit of Patsy Cline. And her band was called the Reclines. And she went on to have an extraordinary career. And I think her version of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah is probably the best version of all, and maybe her best known song. But back in the day, she had so many hits.
We'll cut it on the socials. We'll cut to that as well, so people can hear it as well. And one of the things, actually, it's funny, we talk about how creativity can change a person's demeanor, because so many artists you see out in the public eye, I feel like, you hear things like Robin Williams as an example, or, the artist and the public eye are sometimes very different people.
Yes.
Which I think is it's kind of a dichotomy of creativity, really, because you're out there, like putting yourself out there, but then at the same time you're could be so different, and it's very interesting, but also very hard for some people.
It's very hard, and actually I think about it in terms of being an actor or a performer. If you're doing it really well, you are allowing what is, even if you're acting the part of somebody else, there's something inside of you. You're being very vulnerable. If you're doing it well, you're allowing something of yourself to be coming forward. But you're so right. The one I think of is the American comedian Kevin Smith, who is a huge fan of Degrassi. In person, again, actually a very shy, laid-back person. You would not know him from anything you see in his interviews. Very funny, very potty mouth. Every second word is fuck this, and doing that. But the kindest, gentlest, warmest human being you could imagine. And if a camera comes on, suddenly he's Kevin Smith, and it's the same person.
Right.
And what makes his humor so relatable is he's just actually expressing something that's deep from within himself. It's just in a different way. It's in a more, I guess, engaging and accessible way. He knows how to engage the audience, and it's being himself, but in a very different way. Odd to say.
Yeah. No, one thing else that struck me there as you were talking, because like I've often watched movies, right, and I see the word producer, and I'm always like, what does a producer do? But I mean, you've touched on some of it, so I suppose it's a two-part question. One, if you could kind of educate some of our listeners and even myself, like what is it that a producer kind of does? And then the second part really is, how has that role changed from the way it was to where it is today?
And I mean, producer means different things. And the word executive producer means a whole series of different things. And it's different really in a film. A feature film is really a director's medium. The director, who's sometimes also the writer and the creator, is the driving force. And so the producers in a feature film tend to be unless it's self-produced by the director or the writer, tend to be really just involved with raising the money and doing the, I'll call it mechanical. It's very creative in its own way, but hiring the right people, putting the army together that helps to bring the director's vision together.
Almost like the CEO of the...
Yes. In television, it's different because in a television series, you've got, usually every episode has a different director. You may have directors coming back to do a series of different ones, but it's really more a producer's medium, although even in television, there's sort of a dichotomy between the line producer, who is more like that producer in film and television, just, okay, how do we get the army together? Who's appearing on what day? And it's got a team of people who work in that capacity. And the executive producer, who tends to be the one who may have come up with the idea, could be the chief writer, could be the showrunner, and is driving, would have hired the producer, would have hired the director, would have been very involved in the casting.
Yeah, so okay, that kind of answers my question. I suppose the mechanics of it is very interesting, but has it changed much from when you got into it to where we are today, or is it still very much the same?
It's pretty much the same, but the industry, of course, has changed entirely and has moved more away from. It used to be that feature films were sort of the gold. Now, feature films more and more are sort of reboots and action, big action dramas. And people are focused more and more on short-run television series or long-run television series. And that's where a lot of the creativity has gone.
Yeah, well, what's your opinion on that? Like feature film versus TV series, or does it depend on the story? Or
I think it absolutely depends on the story, but it's also a societal thing.
Yeah.
The way back in the day, you had like operas.
Yeah.
And which were like 4 hours long, and you would have an audience in person, and then plays, which didn't have the musical component, which tended to be a little bit shorter than the operas.
Yeah.
And then films came in a little bit shorter again, the original talkies, and then the feature films, and then television shows which were shorter even again, and now we're in the TikTok era. So it's people's both attention span, but also how they engage has just changed over the years, and there's no right or wrong to it. It's just
the way things go.
Yes. How do you engage?
Yeah. Are you on TikTok yourself?
I am on TikTok, and I enjoy it. And like most people, I just get sucked in. Like I'll just see something with me. It's like cats or baseball or comedians, and I think I can just watch one.
Right.
It looks like a cute cat. I can just watch that one cat.
Yeah.
And then 45 minutes later, where's my life gone?
Do you post much, or do you just watch? Or?
No, well, what we've done, and this is a nice segue into part of the reason that I'm here, at the age of 76, I put out an album. And so apart from being a consumer of TikTok, our manager, Jeff Rogers, and our social media person, Gabriella Mena, said, oh, no, you've got to be on TikTok. So the name of the project is the GTA Rhythm Section. It was just a name I came up with. Someone said, well, you've got to have a name. And I thought, well, it's sort of like the Atlanta Rhythm Section or, one of those studio groups. And they said, well, you've got to have a TikTok. So the GTA Rhythm Section now has over 1,000 followers. And
wow.
It's just little bits and pieces of the making of the album. Why would a 76-year-old come out with an album? It's really an EP, not an album.
Yeah,
but
I believe you brought us
yes,
the GTA. This is it right here.
Yeah.
Nice cover photo,
yeah,
actually.
thank you very much. Yeah, tell us a bit about the cover, actually.
Well, the essence of the song, the main song that drove it all out is a song called Opus 42, Ode to Summer. And it came out of a series of dreams I had when about 2 years ago, in which I was a performer. It was like I was going back to the early days of seeing the Beatles and saying, I'm going to be a rock star. Well, in my dreams, I was being called up on stage, and it was the most natural thing in the world. I'd be called up in the dream, and I'd play really well, sing. There was an audience there. They'd like it. But when I woke up, I would have this melody in my head.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote down about 20 of them. When I say wrote down, sometimes I literally wrote down note for note when I woke up what it was. Sometimes I just sing into my iPhone the melody. And after a while, I thought, what am I going to do with these songs? Well, way back in the day, in the 70s, my friend Christopher Ward and I had written a bunch of songs, some of which were top 10 hits in Canada. So it wasn't that I was a stranger to the art of songwriting.
Yeah.
I loved writing melodies. And then, a career sort of came up, and there were other things. And I was surrounded by musicians as an entertainment lawyer. In the Degrassi series, I was very involved with the choice of music and all of that. That was where I made my deep dive on creativity. So I loved music. I thought, what do I do with these? Could I turn one of these little fragments that have come in a dream into a song? And I tried, and it wasn't quite working. I thought, how do I get it down? So there's a program, which you probably know of, or people know of, called Ableton, which is sort of like Pro Tools.
Yes.
You know it well.
And so I taught myself Ableton.
Wow.
And the interesting thing about learning something like an Ableton software, I knew nothing about it. Like in the beginning, I just sit at the screen and I'd say, okay, how do I start? How do I push the record button?
Right.
I mean, something so basic that, you would be embarrassed. You just type that into Google, Ableton. How do you press record? And there'd be 10 videos saying, how do you press record on Ableton? And so it took me about 6 months and trial and error and just little learning things. And I came up with this demo, which is actually on the B side of that LP, of me stitching together 9 fragments from these dreams in a very Beach Boy-like harmony. It's me singing. This is on the demo. On the actual version, on the A side, I'll tell you who was singing, and it's sort of fun. But me singing and adding harmonies, and thank God for auto-tune, because, but I could add harmonies. I could add a primitive bass guitar, primitive piano, just some drums that you'd pull in from, I don't know where they come from, but you just do that. And I came up with this 9-minute version of a song that I call a song that should never have been written. If written, should never be recorded. And if recorded, should never be released.
Wow.
And I played the demo when it was done. It took like 18 months to learn Ableton and to get this this demo done. And I was playing it for my friend Jeff Rogers, who's a music manager who manages real musicians. And he said, no, I agree with you, Stephen. It should never be recorded. And then he paused, and I sort of went like that. And he said, so when are we going in the studio? So we went in the studio to do a demo recording, or turned out to be more than a demo recording, because when we came out of it, Jeff was saying, the guys you had in the studio, they were really good musicians. I think for the lead singer, why don't we replace the lead singer on the Opus? I've got an idea. And the entire essence of the Opus is summer and love. And the phrase that I like to say is, summer comes and goes, but it always comes back.
Nice.
And if we're lucky, love is the same.
Beautiful.
And so it's sort of the beginning and end of a love affair, the beginning and the end of summer. It's very, very Beach Boys. I've loved the writing of Brian Wilson all the way along. And he sent me to YouTube for this singer named Matt Jardine. And I watched him, and he was playing with Brian Wilson and Al Jardine. I was, wait a minute, this is Al Jardine, original Beach Boy, his son, was out playing with them because he could hit the high notes that Brian and his father could no longer hit.
Wow.
And so Jeff sent it to Matt, and Matt was like, "This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do the lead vocals, and I'll do the background harmonies as well. And I'd put some of my own background harmonies on, but no, I'd do it. And so from his studio in Flagstaff, Arizona, he created virtually all the vocals on that particular song.
Amazing.
And so that is the Opus 42, Ode to Summer, the song that should never have been written.
Has it officially been released now?
It has been officially released. We know what released means these days. It means it's one of, I think, 130,000 songs that are uploaded to Spotify every day.
This is it.
So it's been officially released. It's been pressed into vinyl. And the reason that I really say it should never have been written is it changes tempo. It changes time, it changes key signature. It's 9 minutes long. And it doesn't have the repeating hook choruses that are the staple of
modern
pop
music.
songs. Yes. Now, there's two other songs on which we were in the studio anyway, why not record them? One was actually a song I'd started to write many years ago for my wife, Linda Schuyler. And I thought, well, I'm going to the studio. I could, up it, rewrite, add some new sections, do some new things, and see what happens with it. And then another song that was actually a hit back 50 years ago. I thought, let's do, instead of a Barry Manilow version of the song, let's do a Lizzo version of the song.
Cool.
And so we just had some fun with it.
Okay.
But those are more actual pop songs. They've got verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus out. Whereas the Opus is entirely different.
Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, we're looking forward to we're getting our vinyl players put into the studio.
Yeah, it's good timing. You brought this, because we'll have the turntables.
We'll bless them with your album first play. I'm really looking forward to listening to it.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about earlier, just having something that's inside of you come out.
Yeah.
Well, this is the epitome. It's literally dreams coming true, but actually literally dreams.
I mean, in many ways, when I hear your life story, you've lived a life that probably many would dream to do, and it's great to be able to then, you could at any point say, you know what, that was a great few years with Degrassi. I'm happy with that, but no, it's really great to see that you're driven and that creativity is still there.
Yeah.
We discussed off camera where I mentioned as well, like, as you can, anyone at a certain age can get set, and say, last 10 years, this is what I've done. So this is it, right? This is who I am. And to go out and do that is hugely admirable.
The trick to it all, I think, is failing.
Yeah.
And just failing at everything. I mean, but if you're not failing, you're not pushing yourself to do different things.
Win or learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Win or learn.
Exactly.
So,
and I'm a believer in failing. I'm a believer in fake it till you make it. Just doing things, and how does it work to actually press a vinyl recording?
Yeah.
What are the little words that you write around the label, around the outside?
Right.
All these little things that you just sort of learn and keep you giving. And surrounding yourself with people who are brighter than you are. And they tend to be younger, in my case, tend to be younger than I am.
Right.
It's an elixir. It's a long life elixir.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's definitely some notes there.
Yeah, and I know, and then bringing it back to Sleepless Studios, I know with all the studios we do here, we want to give people the opportunities to, try out, learn. Like, they may fail, like, figuring out things, but eventually, they'll figure out. So I know that was built into what we were doing here at Sleepless Studios as well.
When Jeff first mentioned doing the Sleepless podcast, I love the name Sleepless, because to me, I'm actually the opposite of sleepless. I love sleep, and I'm a very good sleeper.
Yeah.
But I believe in the power of sleep and the power of dreams. And just a little story. In 1927, a guy named J.W. Dunn wrote a book called An Experiment with Time.
Okay.
And the book, I won't go into it too long, but the book details his experience with dreams. And basically his experience is that when we dream, you may dream, first of all, 90% of it is wish fulfillment, or it's just defragging the brain, or it's those weird kind of things that go on, or reliving anxieties about, missing exams or not studying, all those things that we all do. But he says a portion of it is triggered by things that have happened in the past 24 or 48 hours. And so if you've ridden a camel, maybe there's a camel in your dream.
Right.
But he said it's also in the next 24 or 48 hours. It's timeless. Yeah. And he gives some examples, and I've had examples throughout all my life where unquestionably I've dreamt something, just little fragments, not a whole thing, and nothing useful like, oh, these shares on the stock market are going to raise the next day, or this horse is going to win a horse race. But you can see something that unquestionably could not possibly be, and it's not a coincidence. You've dreamt something that happened in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I've gotten used to writing down dreams. And to me, it's so powerful. We talked about Rick Rubin. We talked about the collective unconscious, this creativity coming out. But it's not just creativity. It's some sort of, I'm going to sound very woo-woo, some sort of real connection with the entire universe, the timeless universe, that if you allow it to come out, if you use your dreams, if you write down your dreams and you say, and you have, and you formulate your own dreams and let the universe conspire with you to move yourself forward, it's amazing what you can do. Obviously, you guys have had a dream about doing a studio like this, and you're making it happen. And I'll bet part of it is implanting in your own mind what it is you want to do, and then allowing community, your passion, your openness to the universe to allow the universe to conspire with you to move it forward.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Like we were talking and planning this a full year before we even started, but it was
and
like
even before that in college, we had the DUDJ Society.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's been a journey to get here, and it's funny. I've come to my conclusion that I think very similar. Like Jung talks about that as well.
Yes.
Dreams play a critical part in what can happen in future, and it's your subconscious trying to guide you into certain ways. But it's definitely, when you look back on it, my aunt says everything you do will help you wind up where you are now.
Yes.
You'll look back in your life and be like, oh, how did all these things kind of just align up, right? Yeah. So no, I completely echo your statement, right? And it's something that you've got to have some self-belief, and you've got to go, and as you say, don't be afraid to fail.
And picking up on what you're saying, people sometimes say, oh, is there any regrets in your life? And first of all, I don't have regrets. Are there things that I would go back and say, that was pretty embarrassing. I could have done that better, particularly when I was a teenager and first starting to date.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I certainly messed that one up.
Yeah.
But it was part of the journey along the way to where we are now. Yeah. And who knows if you'd done something differently back then, whether, you would have ended up doing some of the things that you've done.
Well, they say depression is pain from the past, and anxiety is pain from the future, right? Yeah. So, having regrets, I think you can always feel bad about doing something. You can always learn from something. But sitting there going, it's counterintuitive, and you're just going to get yourself into
it's not going to help you move forward.
Yeah.
Yes, and as for the future, yes, you can worry about what is going to happen, but is that, to a certain extent, worrying is good, because then you can plan for plan B and plan C. But after a point, no, there's no point losing sleep worrying about something that you can't control. Yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. So going back a little bit, a question popped into my head when you were talking about the Beatles and the first time here. How would you compare that? How would you compare the Beatlemania to the recent Taylor Swift effect we just had?
I
in the city?
absolutely do compare it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to see Taylor Swift. So I've
did.
seen the
Okay.
first concert I ever saw was the Beatles, and the last concert I've seen is Taylor Swift.
Okay, great.
I think I was the oldest person in the building. We were there with our nieces who just, it was the most phenomenal experience and very, very similar in the engagement.
Okay.
It was 3.5 hours long, her
Yeah,
performance.
yeah.
What a performance she gives. And just the physicality of it. 3.5 hours of running around on stage, sometimes in high heels and singing the entire time. Amazing. The 3 concerts in my life that are the hallmarks, and I'm not going to rank them. I just think they're all up there, almost equally tied. First, of course, was the Beatles.
Okay.
I mean, there's nothing that touches that.
Right.
It was just groundbreaking. It was generation breaking. The second was also a Beatle. You were probably in Ireland at the time, but there was this was about 69, maybe 70. There was a concert here in Toronto at Varsity Stadium called the Rock and Roll Revival. And it had a whole lineup. It started about 10 in the morning. And it started, I don't know that Bill Haley and the Comets were there, but if they weren't, it was like the start of rock and roll.
Okay.
The Chuck Berrys, the Jerry Lee Lewis, right, and then moving right through up till at that point, groups like, as they were then called, the Chicago Transit Authority. Alice Cooper was there. One of his very first concerts. I think it was the one at which he bit the head, or supposedly bit the head off at check-in. But we were there. The stadium was sort of half full. It's a relatively small stadium. It's not like Wembley type.
Right.
Maybe 16,000 people maximum. But maybe there was about 8,000 people there until it suddenly started filling up, and we didn't know why. This was sort of later in the afternoon. And then an announcement came on. John Lennon has just boarded a plane at Heathrow in London and is coming to the concert.
Wow.
Jeez.
So that went on the local radio, and of course, people start. So now it's jammed. By then, we've got pretty good seats just right down in front. A couple of hours later, Eric Clapton is on the plane with Lennon. They're jamming. And then, they've just entered Canadian airspace. They've written a song just for...
Geez, you had a real play-by-play.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then they landed, 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and a cavalcade, an entourage of 40 Hells Angels guided him from Toronto Pearson Airport to the stadium. And he appears on stage. And so he did about 5 or 6 songs. They called themselves, it was the first performance ever of what they called the Plastic Ono Band. And they did 5 or 6 songs that were just old rock and roll songs. So clearly he and Clapton would have known those songs all the way along. So it was easy to do.
Right.
Then, to my mind, highly unfortunately, Lennon said, we're going to take a short break, and he put the microphone up to this huge bag that was on stage that we assumed had some kind of equipment in it. It did not have equipment in it. It had Yoko Ono in it. and for 17 excruciating minutes, Yoko shrieked and wailed.
I remember.
Don't worry, John. Oh,
Jeez.
Finally, the 17 minutes was over. John comes back, and then they sang some of Beatles songs, some of the Lennon-esque Beatles songs. I don't remember, some of the Imagine.
Yeah.
And the song that they'd written, which it wasn't Give Peace a Chance, it might have been Cold Turkey. It was one of those songs from the Plastic Ono Band. And then at around midnight, it was all over. Lennon steps up to the microphone and he says, "You've been a wonderful audience. I'm so glad to have come here. This is our first performance as a band. It's truly a seminal moment. Thank you so much. Good night. Now please welcome Jim Morrison and the Doors."
Jeez.
Wow.
And suddenly they're on stage.
None of this was this all like off the cuff, or was it planned?
Well, No, the Lennon part was not planned.
Okay.
Everybody else had been booked to perform. So there's been a couple of documentaries about it. And anyway, that is number 2.
That's a phenomenal
of the
number 2.
performance of my life. And number 3 is the Taylor Swift.
Wow.
Just singing her own songs, the physicality of it, and of course the technical
Show of it
marvel.
all. Yeah.
And all these young, primarily young women, having the time of their lives. And I love little things like an 8-year-old would come up to my niece and say, tap her on the shoulder very tentatively and say, "Could we trade friendship bracelets?" And they'd trade.
Yeah.
And then she'd go running back to her mother, look what I've got.
Yeah.
And just the feeling of empowerment, of absolute joy. Those 3 concerts are number 1. They're all tied for number 1 in my.
Wow.
Well, that's for Taylor Swift, if she ever listens to this, that's a serious comparison of that. But one thing, I had this discussion because she came to Vancouver and we were walking around just watching, she's so multi-generational.
Yes.
And like, there's very few artists that can capture a whole generation. And that's really what I found most impressive. Obviously, she's an incredible singer and performer, but to capture, because there's a lot of differences between generations, and there can be sticking points, and especially with music, certain age groups are like, turn that crap off, right? But she's managed to keep that throughout, which has been very impressive.
Yeah. And sometimes someone will ask a question, if you could have dinner with anybody, living or dead, who would, it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah.
And I've got a couple of different answers to the question, but Taylor Swift would be one person I'd like to have dinner with, and actually not just Taylor, but with her mother as well.
Oh.
Because, first of all, and not for the reasons that you'd think, well, of course, I'm starstruck or whatever. I've been around people who are stars and, they are human beings.
Right.
I think she's genuinely a genius. She is one of the brightest people imaginable, and she's generous and kind. How do you create an entity that is generous and kind and is a genius? And you just want to be around people like that.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. Well, will we bring it up to the last segment? Because I know Stephen has a meeting.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So that's good timing. We'll bring it up to the hot.
So I'll let you spin, and I can read my chicken scratch.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so this is like what I just said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you spin it and see what it says.
People are more creative today than they have been in the past. Question: yes or no?
People have the capacity to manifest their creativity far more today than they have in the past.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
And I think, now I'm going to be very philosophical about this. The next 5 years, the world is going to change so dramatically, we have no idea how much it's going to change. Artificial intelligence.
Right.
It's going to do some wonderful things. We'll cure cancer. We'll probably discover a solution to the carbon problem. We may invent cold fusion. There's all sorts of really good things that are going to happen. There's going to be some bad things happen. Terminators.
AI artists.
Yes. Yes. Disinformation, misinformation, and unemployment.
Yeah.
Massive unemployment. And we can solve the problems of mass unemployment. We can solve the economic side of that if we're wise and politically savvy by solving the income gap. And because I think the GDP, the economies are going to be just booming because artificial intelligence will reduce the costs of everything and make it really everything very plentiful. We've got to make sure that the haves feed it down to the have-nots, whether that's a guaranteed basic income or whatever.
Yeah.
So we can solve the unemployment problem to an extent, but we can't solve on the economic side. But what we can't solve is doing things, having a job provides some meaning to people. How do we address that? And I think part of it is we have to redefine what it means to be successful. No longer is it the Hollywood ideal, the false Hollywood ideals of having money or having power or having celebrity, being good looking. No, it's getting the inside out. It's doing things for other people.
Right.
It's giving of yourself, whether it's in a creative sense, it can be in a financial sense, it can be helping people across the road, whatever it is. Those are the kinds of meanings, true meanings of success that we need to really start looking towards. And part of it is going to be encouraging people to meditate, but allow themselves to be creative,
Yes.
to dance like there's no one watching, even if there is somebody watching, to do the stupidest thing in the world, like creating a 9-minute song and putting it out on vinyl.
Yeah.
Being creative and allowing your creativity, allowing your inner being to come out so that there is meaning in your life. You've created something that didn't exist before. So is that kind of creativity more creative than Shakespeare? I would argue actually in some ways, yes. I mean, Shakespeare is one person, whereas we can do this for a multitude of people.
Yeah.
So, an interesting question.
Yeah. And I guess then that's maybe where we come in, even we give people an outlet then.
Yes.
To
Oh,
express that
absolutely.
as
This
well.
type of
So
community
comes all together.
is exactly what we
Yeah.
need more of. So you guys are ahead of the future.
Watch this space.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, we're trying, and
We'll
I
try.
think you're right. I think, the world's going to change dramatically, and one thing that I hope though is we don't lose the human side of kind of creativity of performance.
Yeah.
Because there are studios, there are large corporate entities out there being like, you know what, let's take the artist out of it and just create like a AI artist that can get a following. The computer makes the music. You just have a hologram on the stage, So it's one of my hopes that we don't lose the human side of that.
I think, unfortunately, but it won't happen, in the next couple of years. But ultimately, that will happen. What we can hope is that the human side can exist alongside that. My personal dream is the Star Trek holodeck, where you can be right inside a story and it's happening all around.
All around
you.
you.
They're getting close.
Yeah. So, well, there we go. Stephen, really appreciate you coming on. Great chat.
Well, a wonderful chat. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing in building a community here.
Thank you.
I mean, it's a fortuitous that, we have you on. I feel like we have a real part of Toronto's fabric here and Canada's fabric by what you've done. And the conversation today was really great and I'm really thankful of it. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, really
Thank you
appreciate
both
it.
so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah, so I guess, until next time, guys, peace.
And you'll find all of Stephen's information on all the podcasts, and we'll get you links to his TikToks and make sure that everyone, as always, stay sleepless.